I'm Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with your feeder flash for Tuesday, October the 16th, where the bears are out, and it's the polar bears because of this cold snap that we've had. It's come across the central part of the plains, and it's not just that it was so sudden and so cold and so wet, but so early. And it's got everybody kind of spooked about a rough winter. We've got El Nino hitting this year, and in the southern plains, that's usually a sign of a wet, cold winter. And of course, you look at the persimmons and all the signs, the woolly worms and everything. Every old school rule of thumb that you look at shows it's going to be a cold, wet, long, miserable winter, and guys are really getting kind of scared about it. And like we've been saying for the last week or so, these lots are muddy and they're full. I've been taking delivery of all those country cattle here for the last several weeks. Now our sale barns are starting to swell, and especially in the northern plains, and there's just not any room for those cattle. We kind of had a light negotiated trade last week, so movement of your fat cattle coming out the other end of the feedlots wasn't quite as good as what we'd like to see. So there's no vacancy really in the feedlots. Your growing yards are probably getting full. We haven't got to the point where we can turn out any cattle on wheat yet in the southern plains. It's a little bit early, and it's also too wet. They tromp out all the grazing if you did decide to turn them out. But we kind of got a log jam here of calves, and it's taking a toll. And the board was up big on Monday, but you can't turn this cash market around on a dime like you can the board, where people just wake up one morning and decide they want to make the board higher. That it takes a lot more than that on your cash market. But let's look at the board for Monday. October live cattle up $1.05, and that's with additional delivery pressure. And so, those deliveries did what they were supposed to last week. They closed the gap on the basis there and brought your cash and your futures market closer together. Well, we're going up another $1.05 in the face of additional delivery pressure. That's very strong. And your October live cattle ended the week at 113.37, and yeah, guys would like to have that for their cattle, especially whenever they can't seem to get this cash market off $1.11 and can't get $1.11 for all the cattle. December live cattle futures up $1.80, and so that's pretty strong. 117.97 to end the day on Monday. October feeder cattle up 40 cents at 155.10. November was up 60, 155.22. Your weighted average on last week's fat cattle trade, and I apologize because I thought there was more trade on Friday than what there was. Only 8,800 head on Friday. I had 10 guys tell me of 3 deals that big Friday, and it just didn't happen, I guess. But only 89,700 head for your negotiated trade in the 5-area feeding region. That compares to 111,600 head the previous week, and that's about how many we need to move. So backed up a little bit, but I think it might end up being worse on the packers than it is the feedlots, because that's going to put them a little bit short bought. Although they did write down a world of formula cattle last week. But on your negotiated trade, your cash negotiated, 111 was the number. It's been the number for over a month, but we're always on one side of it or the other. And in this past week, last week, we were on the low side of it. A lot of cattle selling off that. We were well up into the 110.60s on the weighted average through Thursday. And then that little dab of cattle that sold on Friday sucked that weighted average down, where it was just over 110.5 at 110.52. That compares to a weighted average the previous week of 110.95. That's quite a bit weaker, even though you still had a steady market, as you call it, because it was a market price that had been established at 111. And generally when we have, and most of the time it's Kansas in the southern plains, whenever they trade the bulk of their cattle, that's where we establish the market. and then that's where they were at last week. But on a dress price, we were sure $1 lower, and it was more than that on the weighted average there. But 174 was the number on most of the cattle, where the previous week it was 175. And then you look at the weighted average, it was similar to the live weighted average at 173.52. So that goes to show you how many cattle were selling off of that main number. So it wasn't a deal where you could sell them 8 or 10 pins and then they'd take a pin or two of junk. They wouldn't give you that top price on the junk or the plainer cattle or the heiferettes or whatever you had, the Mexicans. You couldn't get that for them, so you had to take less. Well, and so that drops your weighted average. That 173.52 compares to weighted average the previous week at 174.83, down $1.31 on a dressed weighted average trend, quite a bit. Nationwide sold more cattle on the fringes at 103,900 head nationwide. Your formulas were 289,200. There's our problem, guys. 289,000 formulas priced off of 104,000 head of cattle. But a lot of forward contracts too, well over 37,000 of those. Your 15 to 30 day delivery unnegotiated, of that 104,000, 20,200 of them were for 2 to 4 week delivery there, and they continue to assemble cattle, not way down the line, but short term in the future there to try to hold this market back. But when we get things lined out, when the weather straightens back out, and it may take a cold snap that covers the whole region, when the weather kind of moderates out, we start getting some of these cattle moved through, and all of a sudden you're going to look up one day and this fat cattle market's going to be $4 to $5 higher in 1 week. It's probably not going to be this week with the weather and everything, but it's going to be within the next 3 or 4 weeks. Let's look at your feeder cattle market, your real-time index on Cattle Market Central. Late in the day on Monday at 151.64, down $1.41, and we were down last week too, but just on Monday's losses on your index down 141. That's pretty significant, but especially in the Southern Plains, it was kind of tough. Oklahoma City National Stockyards only had 3,500 head. The rain, the mud, the change in temperatures, the bearish markets last week, everything just added to them not having a good test in our nation's feeder cattle market. Lower undertone was noted, but that's just really bearish when they're not moving 9 or 10,000 cattle through Oklahoma City like they should. That's just backing more cattle up. So whenever everything straightens out and they can gather them in their shirt sleeves and bring them in when they kind of want to, and they think they're on an up market, it's not going to be an up market because there's going to be too many of them to choke. And that's going to be a problem if we don't continue to market these calves, because there's a ton of them to sell. Joplin Regional Stockyards, 4,900 head, and they had enough to test the market, and that's what it is. It's lower. Feeder cattle, $3 to $6 lower. Calves, $6 to $12 lower, with the full extent of that decline on your unweaned ballers, especially if they were fleshy, but just tough. But in the Northern Plains, big sales up there, and the market's not too bad because we've still got farmer feeders. They're getting on the downhill side of their harvest. They've got a lot of corn. They want to buy some of these calves and feed a calf that's going to take a long time to feed and eat up a whole lot of corn and add value to that. A good friend of mine up in that country, actually he's not in that country, he's in Iowa, but traveled up to South Dakota, took this picture for me. Himself, he's bought more cattle than most people have seen, and he told me he's never seen so many 5-weight steer calves in any sale in his life. But Faith Livestock in Faith, South Dakota, huge sale, somewhere around 9,500 head there. You're not going to see this market report anywhere else because they're not reported by Federal State Market News or anybody else except for Cattle Market Central. Big run. Look at some of these quotes out of there. 3,900 head of 5-weight steer calves. Now, where can you go most of your sales in the country could not hold 3,900 cattle. They may not sell 3,900 cattle in a month. In Faith, South Dakota, they had 3,900 head of 5-weight steer calves. They averaged $550 with a weighted average price on the whole slug of them at $182.08. That's pretty darn good. That was between $3 and $4 higher than last week on a market that's down most places. You look at the heifers, 2,185 head of heifers, a big slug of them too. But what's that tell you? As we get later on into this year, this marketing year, people are seeing signs that we've killed a lot of cows and we've fed a lot of heifers and killed those too. Now some of your guys are keeping a few of their better heifers back, or maybe they didn't do that or didn't plan to do that if they sold them on the videos or private treaty earlier this summer, because we didn't see hardly any of that. But 2,185 head of heifers in the 5-weight category, averaged 532 pounds at 169.22. That was significantly higher than the sale last week. But an individual quote, just to give you a test on one deal, 120 head of 504-pound steers in Faith, South Dakota bring $200 and a quarter. And if you started getting up into the 5 weights very deep, you sure weren't going to get close to $2. It was backing off pretty fast. But we know the whole slug of them in the 5 weights average 182, and that is just a whole lot better than most anywhere else you go. But another sale that we saw was in Central Oregon livestock market. First time we ever saw those in Madras, Oregon. And I'm not even sure if I'm quoting that right, because I've never heard of that sale before, and that's a part of the country I've never been into before, but would like to go, but glad to see that sale show up on Cattle Market Central. 69 head, 633-pound steers at $161.50. And then a market that's not on Cattle Market Central and not really reported anywhere, but we would sure welcome them to join us. But I'll give a quote there that one of your attendees sent me on Monday. Was 69 head of fancy steers in Sigourney, Iowa at $166.75. And for those of you that are in the area, I'll see you at the Merck Animal Health meeting in Waco, Texas on Tuesday night. That's your feeder flash for Tuesday.